takhle. Tak chceš si to? Joe Brockmeier. Tak to je tak jo. A teda řekneš, že mají to o tom, okay, tak jo.
Jednoduchý systém, je to úplně super. Hi everyone, just before we start, let me tell you that there will be a lunch available at the E building after this presentation. So, yeah, everyone is welcome for lunch. Yeah, and if you have something interesting to say, you can sign up for lightning talks in front of this room, and we will vote, or everyone will vote later, and you can present it in the evening. So let's start. Let me welcome Joe Brockmeier and his presentation, Fedora Atomic.
Thank you very much. Hey. Everybody looks so enthused right now. What was that? Yeah, thanks, Matthew. You can always count on Matthew being a sunny face in the audience here. My name is Joe Brockmeier. I'm on Twitter as @JZB. I love it when people ask me questions on Twitter or when they get in touch with me there. So feel free to tweet while I'm doing this presentation. I'm going to try to have a demo towards the end of the presentation. I know people only really, it's kind of like NASCAR. Are people familiar with NASCAR? Somebody? It's the racing where they just go round in circles until somebody crashes. And I'm pretty confident that people only really attend NASCAR races so they can see people crash, much the same way people really only attend these sort of presentations to watch demos crash. So this is my email if you want to get in touch with me. I work for Red Hat, as you probably guessed from the email address. I work in the open source and standards group. These days, I work almost entirely on Project Atomic, which I will be explaining as we go on. So if you have questions about that, I will leave some room in the presentation for questions. If you come up after, if we have time for questions, if you come up after the presentation and ask me a question, I will mock you. If you have a question, probably everyone in the room would benefit. So let's make sure when we have Q&A, people actually ask. Anyway, let's get started. So I've been in Europe now for a little over a week, and you'd think I'd be adjusted to the time zone, but I am not yet. Went to FOSDEM and ran an event. We had some team meetings. So this is pretty much my current status right about now. I'm actually amazed I'm alive and awake that I made it through a week at FOSDEM without catching the FOSDEM flu. So if you've ever attended FOSDEM, I would say if you go to FOSDEM with 10 coworkers, more than likely about 3 to 5 out of 10 are going to be out the next couple days when they get home, because there's just so many people there. How many people were at FOSDEM this year? See what I mean? All these people. All right, so what am I going to talk about other than cat pictures and what I do? I want to give an overview of what Project Atomic is. How many people in the room know what Project Atomic is with some confidence right now? Oh, good. How many people have no idea? Okay. Matthew, you're lying, I hope. I'm going to talk a little bit about Project Atomic and Fedora 22 and also Fedora 21. I'm going to talk a little bit about Project Atomic and CentOS. I want to talk about how you can get involved. And again, I'm going to try to do a demo of rpm-ostree in action. And I'm also going to do some Cockpit demos. Kubernetes figures high into Project Atomic, but we just had a wonderful presentation from Mr. McLean there. So we won't be going over that again too much. And we had a lovely SE Linux and Docker security talk from Dan, so I won't spend a lot of time belaboring that. So let's back up a little bit from the technology and talk about why we're doing this. like people in technology often invent things, and then you're like, okay, now what can we use this for? And I will talk about that in a little bit. So why Project Atomic? People have heard of Docker, I'm assuming, and everybody loves Docker. Developers love containers. Admins kind of love containers for some of the reasons that Dan was mentioning. Because why do developers like containers? Because let's take another step back. How many people have installed something and it's broken and you go to the developer and they're like, what's the phrase you get? It worked on my system. Docker lets you take their system and put it on yours, more or less. So it should, in theory, work from the developer environment all the way to the production environment. And that is a wonderful, wonderful thing in theory, and we want to make sure that that wonderful, wonderful concept is actually available in practice, okay? So admins kind of love containers, and we, when I say we, I mean we as in Project Atomic and also we as in Red Hat. How many folks in the audience are Red Hat employees, by the way? All right. Do we love developers? Wow. Okay, you guys know, okay, pro tip. Valentine's Day is coming up soon, and if your significant other asks you if you love them, try to have a little more enthusiasm when they say that. All right? All right. So, at least for me, I love developers and admins and most people. Traditional platforms are underutilized. Okay? If you're running VMs, if you're running stuff on bare metal, you are probably not getting maximum capacity out of those systems. So another reason why Project Atomic is because we want to get the most for our money. We want to make sure that our systems are humming along at peak capacity because we don't want to waste money. Containers let us maximize that. They let us shove a system full of workloads, okay? We need a minimal platform. Project Atomic is about creating a very minimal platform for running containers. All the good stuff should go in the container. The platform that you run them on should have the bare minimum that you need to make sure the container can run, that your orchestration platform can work, and that you can do updates and manage it, and make sure that your hardware is supported. Another reason why we're doing Project Atomic, when there are other operating systems out there that do similar things, is because we want to have something that developers and admins are already familiar with. If you're looking at things that are brand new implementations of how to run a container, they are things that are sort of foreign to most environments. They're not like what you're running. If you're already running RHEL or CentOS or Fedora or some mixture of those, you will already understand more or less how to run Atomic. So what is Project Atomic? First of all, it is not a new distribution. We work with the CentOS and Fedora communities, and the RHEL folks work with us to produce Atomic hosts that are based on those systems, okay? It's a pattern around a set of projects rather than taking and going and starting something from scratch. And it is a pattern, which also means it's a little mutable. Fedora Atomic is not exactly the same as CentOS Atomic. There would be no point. RHEL Atomic is not exactly the same as CentOS or Fedora Atomic. CentOS is going to have a little flexibility to play around at a certain level and at a certain speed from the SIG, and we'll talk more about that. And Fedora has a much faster pace of development than RHEL, so on the base operating system layer, you're going to see things start to move a lot faster in Fedora than they will in RHEL. Any questions or comments so far? All right, I'll keep going. Part of Project Atomic is the community infrastructure. It's the mailing list, the IRC channels, the Ask Project Atomic, the blog, and everything else to allow people to do work. So if you're interested in getting involved with Project Atomic, and I hope you are, and you see something missing in the community infrastructure, I hope you will come and find me and tell me what it is that you need to get some work done. And I would love to help you with that. Finally, it's work that goes into all these upstreams. So basically, Project Atomic sort of encompasses the work that Red Hat is doing and Fedora and CentOS communities are doing that they get pushed up into Docker, for example, or Kubernetes, or into Cockpit, or in rpm-ostree, okay? So it's a bit weird for open source projects. I've worked with a number of other open source projects over the years. I was OpenSUSE community manager for a couple of years. I worked with for Citrix with the Apache Cloud Stack project for a while, and those are pretty easy to explain. It's like OpenSUSE, it's a distribution. Cloud Stack, it's one simple thing. Project Atomic, well, it's kind of a whole bunch of different things. So one of the things that we're doing is defining the atomic host. There are two concepts that you're going to hear about over the next couple of months. One is atomic host, and one is whatever we wind up calling the atomic host plus all the goo to make things run better on top of atomic. So the atomic host is pretty stripped down. It's Docker and the Linux kernel. It's Kubernetes, systemd. By the way, I know systemd is supposed to have a small cap initially. LibreOffice, however, disagrees with me, and I got tired of fighting with it. Flannel for networking, SSSD, and of course rpm-ostree. If you want to see the atomic host definition, or if you want to give some input on it, there's a short URL, and slides will be available after the presentation, so you don't even have to copy that down. But you can find it there. Pull requests or suggestions happily accepted there. It's a gist up on GitHub. So how many folks have heard of Cockpit? Okay, a fair number, but not everybody. So this is a project. One of the things that we did with Project Atomic that I'm really happy with Red Hat for is when we started working on all this, we pulled a bunch of things together that already existed as opposed to a lot of NIH or reinventing the wheel. So Cockpit had been started long before Project Atomic came into being, and basically decided that this would be a good web-based configuration management for smaller implementations. It's a server manager for administering servers via the web browser. How many folks have used Webmin? It's kind of sort of like that, except a lot prettier, more functional, and without the horrifying security problems. Apologies if there are any Webmin folks in the room. It doesn't interfere with your normal admin tools. You can do work on your system without, sometimes you get an administrative tool that basically decides, okay, I own your system now, so if you change a text file behind my back, I'm just going to revert it. It is designed to be multi-server. You can find it here at cockpitproject.org. I'm going to try to do a short demo of Cockpit towards the end of the presentation, just to show you the interface and what it's working on. It's actually running on my laptop, not an Atomic system, because I have managed to break a few things spectacularly on my demos. This is part of the fun with travel, is when you break things, you don't necessarily have the bandwidth to easily fix them. I think I've made a few hotels cry the last week trying to download things. Not the actual hotel, but like their internet connection anyway. Docker I won't spend a lot of time on because I think there's plenty of Docker content here in other sessions. But as already been emphasized, Docker is one way to do Linux containers. It just happens at the moment to be the most popular way. It was originally built on LXC. The concept of containers is in no way new. It's been around for a long time. But the thing about Docker is it's application-centric. Developers really like it. It's easy to use. It's portable. It supports versioning. How many folks have actually played hands-on with Docker? Okay. How many folks are using like the versioning features so that you can roll things out easily? And who's using it in production? Much fewer hands went up there. Okay. How many people think you'll be using it in production this year? Okay, good. It is reusable. We had a great talk at Flock this year by a guy from Yahoo who was describing the way his teams use Docker containers where one container would contain the base layer, then the next would layer on Apache, and then the next team could put on its application on top of that. And so it made a nice little workflow for them to roll out applications where the team doing the end-user facing application doesn't have to worry about the base OS or Apache, they just worry about their application. Another major component, and the component I'm going to talk the most about here, is rpm-ostree. Initially, this talk slot was for Colin Walters. He was going to come in. He is kind of the genius behind rpm-ostree. So I probably won't do this anywhere near as much justice as Colin would, given that he created the thing. But he should be here tomorrow if anybody has questions or wants to seek him out. If you're really interested in rpm-ostree or contributing back, he'd love to talk to you. So rpm-ostree is basically Git for operating systems. How many folks have had the experience of you install an RPM and it breaks something? Okay. How many folks have tried to roll it back to an earlier known good version and found out that RPM was really only meant to go one way, and that's forward? Okay. RPM is many wonderful things, but when they designed it, they did not say, but what if we break something? Well, how will they go back? Nah, that'll never happen. Everything goes forward, right? In fact, that's not so much the case. So, sorry?
Saying dash old package to RPM just works when you want to go back. This is all that you need. Just use the RPM, UVH, and the old package.
Not always, but we'll talk later. This is sort of a very minimal diagram I stole from Colin on the standard system. Basically, you have the new kernel, and you have a writable user, etc and var. And then you update it, and you install new packages, a new kernel or whatever, and then you reboot and you swap. With rpm-ostree, it's a little bit different. You basically have the kernel and user and etc, and you have a writable var. And when you update, you will update the kernel in the user space and etc, and then you will reboot into that new space. If something fails during your update, if something breaks during that process, you don't go forward. If something in that is broken, you can do a rollback into the previous known good system. There are some exceptions if you break things spectacularly sometimes, but hopefully you have enough testing going on that you don't completely hose the system, hopefully. The ostree file system model, user is a bind read mount always. So the etc tree is basically rebased. So if you've changed configuration files or whatever, ostree tries to do smart things and do a kind of a three-way merge on those. Var is untouched. So the first question I get from a lot of folks when you first explain the concept of rpm-ostree is like, well, what about my user data? You know, my history, for example. Is my user history going to be preserved between reboots? And the answer is yes. So you should, whenever you're doing things in rpm-ostree, all of your user goodies are still there when you reboot. You just get a new tree for the system. And home lives under var home, where it is allowed to be writable. Any questions or anything on that? All right. Composes and updates. One of the fun things that I'm going to hope to do a demo of is showing you how to build your own atomic systems. If you've ever wanted to maintain your own immutable system, rpm-ostree makes it really easy to do that. You can compose with rpm-ostree, compose, or other tools. You can do a quick Italian, I have lost English, pardon while I reboot. You can do a client atomic upgrade, and that just calls up the next, if there is an available update, calls down that upgrade and then sets it up for you. When you do a compose, it's similar to doing a git commit from a yum install root. In other words, it basically takes your package set and composes it in a similar fashion to what you would normally do to build that, but then it turns it into the ostree stuff. And it actually handles all of your permissions in a way that some of the other tools do not, that Git would not. Then you boot into the new root. You basically, ostree handles your bootloader and all that good stuff. If you have a failed update, no worries. Now I want to talk a little bit about Fedora and CentOS Atomic, because these are sort of two cooperating but parallel and independent paths that are going on right now. So Atomic was announced in April of last year, which was about midway through the Fedora development cycle for Fedora 21, which posed a couple of challenges, but I think that especially some of the RelEng folks and Colin and other folks really stepped up to get enough pieces into shape to have something workable in Fedora 21. So we shipped Fedora Atomic Host as part of Fedora 21. It includes Docker, Cockpit, Kubernetes, Flannel, and basic packages. Actually, Flannel is, I believe, an update after the fact. But you can get that if you install the Fedora Atomic Host image and do an Atomic upgrade. You'll go ahead and get Flannel as part of that. We're doing regular updates via rpm-ostree. There are a few rough edges still. We're still deciding how things should look. For example, I think we had some Ruby stuff in the initial thing, and when we decided to pull it out before people got too attached to it as part of the base image. One thing I neglected to mention as part of rpm-ostree is, in its current state, you don't install new packages. So once a system is rolled out, if you want to package a new package on the system, you need to do a new compose with that package added to your manifest. You don't just, yum install it onto a working system. This follows, sorry? Or you put it in a container, yes. Thank you, Dan. And then what you do is you disable SE Linux. No. I should never say that when he's actually in the room. It's one thing to poke him when we're on a conference call, but if we're actually in the same room, I don't know what'll happen. But no, sorry, where was I at? Yeah, so you cannot install new packages onto the host system. You should usually deploy things, and we're trying to be kind of firm with people on this, in that people come to us all the time. It's like, oh, this favorite tool of mine isn't in the Atomic host. And it's like, do you really, 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 really need that on the host, or can you run it in a container, or can you run it in a privileged container, or I guess a super privileged container? When is your talk on that? Tomorrow sometime. Tomorrow sometime, go learn about privileged and super privileged containers. They're like regular privileged containers, but they have a little cape. So for Fedora 22, there are a couple of things we want to add. For Fedora 21, we only had the QCOW images and raw images, so really only suitable, and AMIs, so really only suitable for running in a couple of public and private cloud environments, which is a good start, but not quite far enough. So for Fedora 22, what we want to add to this is a Vagrant box, because developers love them some Vagrant. So we want to have a Vagrant box for Atomic that people can use, and a Vagrant box for other Fedora things too. I'm just mostly concerned with Atomic at the moment. We also want to have a bare metal installer, which Fedora has always had, but we have not had. Colin is actually spinning up a Rawhide-based Fedora bare metal installer that you can use. And you could actually use that to sort of slide install anything else that you wanted on, but that's a couple too many steps. We also want to have a live OS for Pixie booting. We also want to package Rocket for Fedora 22, which is in progress, but stalled a little bit because they have some odd choices in how they're doing it. So we're trying to figure out how to, I think it's package a rootfs as part of the package or something like that. It's a little weird. We're also trying to reduce the size of Atomic. Right now, the file is bigger than we care about, and or bigger than we want it to be. People kind of wonder, why do we care about the size of Atomic? Generally speaking, we all have fast connections these days, right? So it doesn't matter if we're downloading 300 megabytes or 200 megabytes, right? But when you're in certain environments and you want something to go over, well, yes, this network, not so much, yes. But yes, this is actually one of the reasons it matters. But in production, people are like, well, I have InfiniBand and all these wonderful things, or I have, whatever. It's really super fast. But if you're shuttling 500 images across, it starts to add up. If you're booting up hundreds or thousands of images, it starts to add up. So we need to worry about slimming that down a lot more. We also, as part of Project Atomic, we want to start improving the available images and Docker files that are already off the shelf. So containers that are already running Apache or MariaDB are the things that you care about. And we're working with the SCL folks and working with the CentOS folks on Docker files and Kubernetes definitions, or I can't remember, is it Mike? Kubernetes recipe definition, what is like the standard parlance for give me a file that defines this? Definition, okay. CentOS Atomic Host, this moves a little bit differently. Fedora has a defined release cycle, so every 6 months we'll have a new Fedora Atomic, at least for now. CentOS is a SIG. We're running a SIG with CentOS, and we move pretty much at whatever pace we want. That means we could do, weekly releases if we want to. And we do update things very quickly right now. We don't have a policy, for example, that says this release is going to stay this way for X amount of time. We haven't done what we call a stable release yet that is expected to stay a certain way for any period of time. That will probably change at some point when more people get involved and we have folks who say, okay, I'm actually using this in a real world situation, and can we nail something down? Regular updates are being out. I put an asterisk by that for 2 reasons. One is regular is irregular depending on when the packages update. So some weeks it might be every day, some weeks it might be one update during the week, just depending on whether any of the packages that make up the host definition are updated. The other reason I put an asterisk there is we are cooperating with the Vert SIG and some other SIGs and using the same packages. And we ran into an interesting little issue last week where basically the Docker package was pushed out, some dependencies were changed, and that impacted our host definition. And long story short, we pushed out an update that removed sudo, a couple other interesting things. Oh yeah, and Docker. So yeah, that was a little bit of a problem if you were running that. But that proved that the whole rollback concept is in fact a good thing. So we need a little more testing, a little more automated testing on the CentOS side, and a little more manual testing, and folks to pay attention to that. If you are interested in getting involved with the CentOS SIG, you could basically do that in one of 2 easy ways. One is to speak up on the CentOS Devel mailing list or IRC channel, or the other is the Atomic Devel mailing list or the Atomic channel on IRC. Let's talk about building your own Atomic images. So, as I said, right now we're pushing out we're trying to have very minimal Atomic host images that people can use to run containers. But in your environment, you may want to do something different with Atomic. You, in fact, might want to run Atomic as your desktop. You could do that. You could run Atomic for other server things. I've talked to the Zen folks, for example, about having a immutable host based on CentOS Zen that you could roll out and just roll out updates using rpm-ostree. Creating your own repo is actually very, very easy. My colleague Jason Brooks has written a really good how-to, and you can go through that in about 5 steps and a mind-bogglingly large amount of bandwidth the first time you do it. You can have your own repo and update any Atomic installed system to that. It's just a few commands. You run it in a container. It doesn't touch anything on your host operating system, so you don't have to worry about mangling anything. You can even do all this from a Debian system or whatever, I believe. Any questions on that? All right, now is when I'm going to try to do the demo, because I built one, the bandwidth cooperated, and I was able to build one tree, and then I realized that I didn't have Git, so I started building another one, and then everything slowed to a complete crawl. I'm going to look and see if that's finished. If not, I'll just show you doing a rollback. But I'm hoping I can show an actual update here. Oh, how lovely. Usually when I do a presentation, I have to look behind me while I'm working, but they actually have a monitor with the same thing that you're seeing, so I actually can just look at my laptop. That's awesome. I know. I'm just saying I see what I'm supposed to see. I didn't say you got to see what I was supposed to see. All right, so my update is not done, but I'm going to go ahead and move this over here. So this is a system running Fedora 21 Atomic that I have updated from stock Fedora 21 to my own custom-built repo. Okay? Maybe. I'll give you a firm maybe. Okay, here's what I'll do. There we go. Let's see if this is a little better. All right. Okay. So first I'm going to look here. All right, you notice a little bit of a difference here. So I'm doing an atomic status, and this is telling me this looks a little bit like Git to those of you, probably to those of you who use Git. You've got an ID of the current timestamp, and then you've got the ID of the old one. So this is telling you here, I did this update at 9:23 local time, and then I did an update kicked off last night at just after midnight. That's the timestamp for that. So all I have to do now is an atomic rollback. And that basically has reverted to the old version. And it's basically just changed some pointers. And as you can see, it's added a bunch of things, or actually it's removed a bunch of packages that I included in my custom tree. And then it added Flannel, which is something that, because I had forgotten to add it to the host definition, was removed. So if you have something on your system and you do this and you don't explicitly include it, it will be removed because it's going to be it's a computer. It's very literal about what it is that you're going to do. It does what you tell it to do, not what you want. Okay? So now all I have to do all right. Now that's going to take a minute. I'll go ahead and pull that up. All right, and we've rebooted in there. And I'm sorry this isn't a terribly exciting demo. It's a little more exciting when I can actually do an update. But on one hand, that's a good thing, right? We want our systems more or less to be boring, you know? Success, okay? So now if we do an atomic status, you can see that we have switched to using the earlier version, okay? And we can do that again. I can roll back and move to the actual newer update, still using rollback, which is a little bit weird. But any questions on that? Yeah?
Can you update back from the version you wrote back? Can you update back to the newer version?
Yeah, I can, if I do atomic rollback, that will bring me back to that. So. Yeah, yeah. Oh, can I run an update? Let me see. Only if I actually start that. Hang on a sec. Oh, yeah. Hang on. Ah, darn it. That's not what I wanted. So the answer is, if I wasn't running another process at the moment, I could, yes. The reason I failed at that, I'm running a container right now that's doing the compose. It's also the same container that you run the Apache process to actually serve the repo. So, yeah. Ah, that's true. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see here. If I can get the commands right. I don't actually spend as much time in Docker as I should. Let's see here. Yeah, I'm not getting it. Let's go back in a minute. Any other questions on that, though? Any questions I can successfully handle? I can just switch. He was wanting to see if it would do an update to that. In other words, I think he was wanting to see it go ahead and do the update from that person. But yeah, I can do the rollback, sure. 5 minutes. Oh, wow, really? Okay. Yeah, and see that just, who was asking that question? I've lost what. Yeah, so that basically just did the rollback, and if I reboot, it'll go into that system everything's great. Any other questions on rpm-ostree? I wanted to show off Cockpit real fast. Yeah?
Where does rpm-ostree store all the different snapshots?
It stores them on disk. It's just its disk layout is a little bit different. It's kind of pointers to a little bit below, if that makes sense. Yeah, if you had access to the physical system, you could find all the stuff. Other questions? Let me go ahead and show Cockpit real fast because it's darn pretty, and there's not as much Cockpit content in the event as Docker. So as I was saying, this is actually running on my laptop. So right now I have one container running on the laptop. I've managed to spectacularly break my root login, so I can't run Cockpit with the containers at the moment on the Atomic. But basically, this is a stable release of Cockpit. The Cockpit team is moving very fast. They've probably developed all sorts of new and wonderful features, but this is the stable version of Cockpit that's in Fedora 21. As you can see all the system information at a glance. You can see how much memory is being used, how much disk is being used, your traffic. You can actually get in here as administrator, manage your user accounts. You can actually get in here, and the thing that we find really interesting, of course, is container management. You can see all the containers that are on the system, start and stop containers from the cockpit or from the cockpit management system, manage containers there, see how much memory they're using and consuming and everything. There is a cockpit devel mailing list if you have questions or comments or anything or interest in that. You can drill down into individual containers from here and even get into the console. Usually. Oh, yeah, we hit an oops. Okay. Yeah. Who was that?
Just log out and log in again. It has a very low version number.
Nope. Okay. It's not cooperating. I think Cockpit has decided it's time for lunch. We'll take one last question and then everybody can move on and get food. Yes, sir. Oh, that wasn't a question. That was a statement. Yeah.
I heard about CoreOS. How does it fully relate to?
So, I mean, on one level, they have similar concepts, okay? On another level, so the differences between CoreOS and this are many. And I'm not enough of an expert on CoreOS to get into deep details on what they're doing. But what I can say, one big difference between this and that is that this is a known set of packages. It's a host that you trust, either CentOS or Fedora or RHEL. There is an entire ecosystem around what we're doing here that encompasses pretty much from top to bottom what you need to be doing with containers. Whereas with CoreOS, you get one thin layer of this problem, but not, if you're using CoreOS, what are you using for your containers? What are you running CoreOS on top of? How do you know the provenance of their packages and things like that? Is one difference. There are probably a number of different approaches we've taken with SE Linux and things like that, although I believe they're also using it. But again, I have spent almost zero time with CoreOS, so it's hard for me to get into details on that. We have adopted a couple of their packages. I know that they've, taken stuff from us as well. So, all right, yeah. Yeah. If you care about small and the best, you come and you work with us to make this smaller. So.
The other thing that's interesting, I think, CoreOS is they kind of bitten off what seems like the interesting part of the problem, which is cool for them.
Yeah.
But the other thing, like what goes to your containers, like you're saying, they're declaring that not their problem, and we kind of see that as our problem as well. And so one of the things I think is pretty interesting is if you run they have the idea of serverless management.
Yeah.
If you run that, it is actually based on
I didn't know that. Okay. Right. Okay. Okay, folks, thanks, and have a great lunch. Yeah, I haven't. I'm working on getting a PDF right now. Now, see, I have.
Have you ever seen CentOS?
I've like heard the name. I've never actually worked with it.
I think they take a much better approach than
we try to do with installation of RPM. They make a virtual file system from a package, so you can have a directory with RPMs, and you can build whatever hash map you want to. So you basically make a hash map from files from all the packages, so you can combine your file system from, you can have like 10 versions of gRPC in the system,